Tony, I love that you mentioned too that I was with Hope Mission and with IJM and Move In, and I say that just because I have a lot of friends sometimes when it's in the missional context, and they're really drawn to a certain people group or like a type of work. It's like, like I really have a heart for youth, or I really have a heart for like the homeless community. And my wife, she kind of always teases me, and she's like, "That's not really you. You just kind of have a heart for people, wherever they are." And and God's just given me the grace to be able to be a part of so many tremendous ministries, whether it's Hope Mission, Move In, which is exactly what, as Tony described, Christians being intentional about the communities they live in, moving into those spaces. If you're going to do life, do it alongside your neighbors. And now with International Justice Mission, I've been privileged to join our team. And a similar role is what Tony was saying. My job is to really help call all of us who've been entrusted with resources, whether it's time, prayer, financial resources, any of the skills and talents God's given us and entrusted into our care, to not hoard them, but to be free and generous. We've got a God, a triune God, who is generous in the Trinity is always exalting itself. And you see that too in the life of the church, that we're meant to be sent out, exactly as Tony was saying. And so that's in every sphere of our lives. I used to live in Edmonton. I live now in Calgary. Don't hold that against me. But before we kind of get started, I wanted to read a few scriptures that we're going to be basing our message on today. Really kind of diving right in all over Scripture to hear about God's heart for justice. The great requirement. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I got sitting in the front row with my hand up too, a little keener. So points from the teacher on that one. We're going to start with Zechariah chapter 7, verses 9 to 10. If you want to look this up on your phones, if you have a old school paper Bible with the really thin pages, Zechariah chapter 7, verses 9 to 10. The prophet here is speaking, God is speaking through the prophet to the people of Israel, and he says, verse 9 of chapter 7, "This is what the Lord Almighty said. Administer true justice. Show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other." Next place we're going to go is in Isaiah, the beginning of Isaiah in chapter 1. It's one verse, verse 17. I know this verse well enough because it's on the IGM crest, which you can't really read the tiny writing there. But in Latin it says, "Quarite iudicium subvenente oppresso," which means, we'll read the whole verse in English. How about that? Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17 says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." And that middle part, seek justice, defend the oppressed, is on in Latin, because I work with a lot of lawyers, and I guess Latin is really in vogue. And that's what's on our crest as an organization, along with two open scriptures, two Bibles, the world itself. And so that reminder for us as an organization that we are called to seek justice, defend the oppressed. And because I work with a number of lawyers, plead the case of the widow, take up the cause of the fatherless, they take very literally. And then Luke chapter 4, verse 16 to 21. It's one of my favorite sections of Scripture. If you guys have a second, or you want a second, feel free to flip over to it. Jesus is going through the region of Galilee. In verse 16 it says, "He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. And he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.' Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, 'Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing.'" I was telling James how excited I was to be in the building and be able to speak in front of an actual live audience. Normally I'm at home and I'm wearing a dress shirt on the top and pajama pants or shorts on the bottom, so I can't hide behind the stand here like I would on a Zoom call. But it's also good to be back in Edmonton because this city has a place in my heart. We've lived a little all over. My wife and I kind of consider myself a Canadian mutt. I live in Calgary now, was Edmonton before that. Lived in Ottawa, Ontario, Hamilton, Ontario, but I was born in Richmond, British Columbia. And I even have the t-shirt to prove it. I found this the other day. I'm so glad my mom keeps ridiculous keepsakes like this. It says special delivery from the Richmond General Hospital. Isn't that adorable? I'm assuming this is me being held by the stork in this picture. I don't think I can fit into it anymore, but and actually this city has a dear place in my heart in part because my son was born here. So this is my boy Simon. He's 5 now, and I love this photo. I keep it on my desktop at work, in part to remind me of God's love as a father. But he was born here in Edmonton, right down the street at Royal Alex Hospital. So we have any Royal Alex babies here? Vanessa, there you go. And it was a January, like -20 night where he was born. And I swear this kid is like born Northern Canadian because he still doesn't get cold. But the days really leading up to his birth were full of anticipation for myself and my wife. So his due date was December 28th. He was born on January 7th. My poor wife, 1 and 7 weeks, something like that. But it really gave Advent this whole new flavor, this whole new feeling, because here we are walking through the parallels of the story of Christ coming into the world, and I'm waiting and waiting with anticipation, eager to be able to meet my son. And I think that's what Advent's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be all about anticipation, waiting, the coming into view or the coming of some being. And that's what the expectation of a baby is meant to be. It's supposed to be full of excitement and anticipation. But this Freedom Sunday, which I hope is the first of many with us together, I want to tell you about a mother for whom waiting for her baby's arrival was a mixture of fear and dread. And it's because her baby was doomed to be born a slave. Tiama was from a sunny little village in the south of India, just outside of the big city of Chennai. And this village was typical of a lot of Indian villages in that they had a sort of a mix of different communities and ethnicities and castes. Her name actually means mothers of mothers. Back around 2012, Tiama's husband took out a small loan of less than $20 from a local business owner so he could buy medicine for their daughter, Laviana. And this was no gift, though. This loan was a lure. It was a trap that was meant to entrap her and her family for a lifetime. The business owner used deceit and lies to balloon their debt, to rob them of their freedom, and to convince them they could never escape. Now, this is a common practice, unfortunately, in parts of India, known as bonded labor slavery. And for a cash advance or a loan, a business owner or a factory owner can increase the debts 1,000-fold, require a payment of a loan all in one lump sum, and then for years of labor will pay employees pennies per day, also charging them for whatever room or board they give in that time. And in this way, whole generations of families can be enslaved. And this is what happened here. The entire family was trapped under brutal slavery, chopping wood under the hot sun for hours that turned into days, that did turn into years for Tiama, her husband, and their daughter, Lavanya. Tiama refers to her master, the slave owner, only as the beast, and he seemed to be untouchable, invincible. He enslaved Tiama with others with total impunity, openly taunting and ridiculing them, using profane and disgusting insults, and violently beating them when they didn't comply. Nobody could touch him. Now, Tiama is no different from my wife, myself, or any other mothers or expectant parents here in this room where she had dreams for her children. Dreams of who they would become, but for a slave, a dream is a forbidden luxury. For a woman in slavery, the knowledge that they're about to become a mother tortures their conscience because they know they have nothing to offer this growing life within them other than a life of slavery. Tiama could never prepare for her baby like my wife did. She had no access to prenatal vitamins, hospital care, any food. She couldn't rest. She couldn't soak her swollen feet. And there was always more work to do. The beast was always looking threateningly over her shoulder. So imagine this fate for your budding young child. As Christians, we know the powerful potential of a baby born to impoverished, marginalized young women. It's how our Savior came into this world, the first true Advent. But for Tiama and millions of women around the world like her, this is the stakes of modern-day slavery. This is the tragic unmotherhood of millions of women who are left powerless in slavery. And these are the life or death stakes that IJM faces every day around the world. This is the brokenness which the world groans under, and it grieves God. Zechariah 7 verse 10 said, "Do not oppress the widows or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor." And the reason we're gathered together today on this Freedom Sunday is that there are still people enslaved around the world. In fact, there are over 40 million people in the world, like Tayama, living as slaves today. To put that number into context, 40 million people is greater than the population of Canada, and it's more people than have ever been enslaved at any point in history. Now, you might be asking, well, how can this be? Isn't slavery illegal? Hasn't it been illegal for a long time? And you'd be right. In every country where these 40 million people groan under the weight of this injustice, slavery is illegal. There are laws, good laws, on the books that are against slavery. But the problem is that 5 billion children, women, and men live in what's being called the justice gap. They live outside the protection and the benefits of the laws in the countries where they live. Without access to strong justice systems, people in poverty are uniquely vulnerable to everyday violence. And they can't pay for security or safety the way that their wealthier neighbors can. In many of the countries where IJM works, private security is a booming business because everyone knows if you want security, you pay for it. If you want good legal representation, you pay for it. And if you are poor, you don't get it. And so this violent man was able to enslave Tayama and her husband and dozens of other people at his woodcutting operation because he was confident no one was coming for them. They were on their own. Power and influence was on the side of the oppressor. This is the type of everyday violence that is a threat for people in poverty. It's as much a part of poverty as hunger, disease, or homelessness, but it's not the violence of war, it's not the violence of genocide, it's common criminal violence that's already against the law. It's already illegal in the countries where they live. Crimes like slavery, violence against women and children, police abuse of power. But this common everyday violence against one poor woman living in one small community in a nation of more than 1 billion people, it doesn't make the news there, and it doesn't make the news here. And so for Tayama, her odds of ever being rescued or found were beyond bleak. Tim Keller, in his book Generous Justice, discusses Psalm 41 verse 1 at one point where he says, "Blessed is the man who considers the poor." And Keller goes on to explain that this word considers in the Hebrew actually means to give sustained attention to a subject and act wisely in regard to it. And then he goes on to say that God doesn't want us to merely give the poor perfunctory help, but to ponder long and hard about how to improve their entire situation. And this is why International Justice Mission was formed over 20 years ago. IJM's founder, Gary Haugen, writes in several books about his experience as a young lawyer who was tasked to head the United Nations inquiry into the Rwandan genocide. And he shares stories of wading through mass graves and realizing in that moment that what the poor in these communities in Rwanda needed when they were at their most vulnerable wasn't clean water, and it wasn't access to education, it wasn't small loans, it was someone to restrain the person with the machete who was coming towards them. They needed protection, and that's what was missing. So after pondering long and hard how to improve the lives of those living in poverty, IJM began to respond to a massive global need. The reality is undermining all of the faithful and courageous work to bring healthcare, education, food, and other vital services to people who are in poverty is the plague of violence. There might have been a wonderful prenatal clinic for Tayama to be able to go to in Chennai that might have been funded by international aid. But she can't get to it. She can't leave the work site without fear of a violent beating. There might have been food programs set up nearby that would have given essential nutrients to her daughter Lavanya, the nutrition that she needs. But instead, her family barely survived for over 3 years on a small, thin gruel of rice that their master begrudgingly gave them. But despite this epidemic of poverty against those in violence, little had actually been done in the international community to restrain the oppressors who are a great source of harm to the vulnerable. And without the resources and expertise required to confront this abuse, overseas workers, missionaries, other international development agencies, they really needed the assistance of trained public justice professionals. And this is where IJM stepped in. International Justice Mission is a global organization that fights slavery, human trafficking, and other forms of violent abuse against the poor throughout the developing world. And as followers of Jesus, we take up the call from Isaiah 1:17 to defend the oppressed, to take up the cause of the fatherless, to plead the case of the widow. Our team has more than 20 years on the front lines. We're a global team of lawyers, social workers, community activists, other professionals like speakers, in 33 offices around 23 countries who share this mission of protecting people in poverty from violence. One of the beautiful things I like about our organization is that you see all these countries represented. 95% of our staff in these countries are nationals of that countries. So we'll have prayer gatherings where we have translations in Spanish, or we'll have people preaching or praying in Tagalog. We have offices in India, Romania, Ghana, and all over the world. We have community members locally embedded who know the problems that their community are facing, who are committed to be able to bring justice to their people. The reality is there is a solution to this problem. IJM's solution to the problem of everyday violence is both simple in its concept and incredibly complex in its execution. Instead of inventing new parallel ways to protect the poor from violence, IJM's solution is to collaborate with the existing local justice systems within a community, to build communities where people can be expected to be safe and protected. There are police, courts, there are judges, there's entire systems and operations that exist within these countries, but the reality is they're not serving the most vulnerable. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it, as many people suspect, is outright corruption. People that are taking bribes, people that are prioritizing their friends' cases. A lot of times, though, it's a lack of training. There was an entire season of our work in India where our team, there'd be an entire police unit in one state that wouldn't do any investigations into any forced labor or human trafficking claims because they just didn't know what to look for. They didn't know how to look for it, how to investigate it, so they just didn't do that police work. That training also might take the place of with social workers or judges themselves. There's a lot of reasons why a justice system might not be performing. It might be completely overloaded. There's photos, and I couldn't find it unfortunately for today, but there's photos of a records room in a superior court in Ghana, and it is literally stacked from floor to ceiling with papers. And so even if you were managing as a woman who'd been suffered some form of physical violence or sexual violence in Ghana, and you made your way all the way to the courts to have your case heard, the clerk would have to find your documents somewhere in this massive pile. So it might be overwork, it might be corruption, but for whatever reason, the justice systems aren't working, and so we want to come alongside their existing justice systems to help them function to protect their citizens. So to build communities around the world where people can be expected to be safe and protected, IJM works with existing justice systems. This is also scalable because if you think about it, instead of having IJM staff members in the tens of thousands around the world, we're working with existing justice systems and we're putting the burden on that country to protect its citizens. That the police and the courts and the judges exist to serve all citizens, not just the wealthy. Immediately, though, beyond the important and long-term work of strengthening justice systems, IJM works to rescue and restore victims. This is the important work where someone like Tayama cannot wait 10 years for her justice system to be transformed while she's languishing in slavery, waiting for her baby to be born. And so IJM's, again, we don't have the jurisdiction in Ghana or Uganda or in India to go and to rescue someone and to arrest a perpetrator, but the police do. So we partner and build extensive partnerships with the local police. We help to build investigations towards whatever the claim is, and then go seek out those that are enslaved, that are falsely imprisoned, whoever needs rescue, and then work in an aftercare process to be able to make sure that they're restored. And again, we have partners within these countries that work in the aftercare part. We also work to bring criminals to justice. It's not enough to just rescue people out of slavery if their perpetrators go free, because it perpetuates impunity. They know they can just go and enslave someone else. And so we work alongside justice officials to ensure that criminals are held accountable in courts of law, in local courts. This helps us stop the cycle of violence and deter others from abusing vulnerable people. And one of the important things about bringing criminals to justice, I was chatting with one of my colleagues in the Philippines. His name is Lawrence. His dad gave him the nickname Law, which is ironic because he's a lawyer. So I feel like he sort of set him up on that career path. And we were talking about the justice system in the Philippines, and he was saying the reality is systems are people. They're made up of people. And so he could be frustrated as an attorney who's trying to get cases heard of children who've been abused or who've been exploited in the Philippines. But instead of getting angry, he just wants to work with his colleagues in the justice system, the clerks, the judges. And he even said an important and an indispensable part of a justice system is the public defenders, the lawyers who are actually tasked with defending the human traffickers and abusers that he wants to see put behind bars. He knows that they're an essential part of the justice system, even though they're defending, quote, the bad guys, because they need to have true justice. They need to have their day in court as well. And for the survivors to know that their case was heard and that it was truly just, there needs to be a proper push and pull within the defense and the prosecution. So we work to bring criminals to justice. And then this last and most important part is the scale demand for protection. IJM does not want to be the only people doing this work forever. My hope, God willing, is that one day there will be no more Freedom Sundays and I'll work myself out of a job. Because the people within those countries, the justice systems, the police, the lawyers, the prosecutors, they are actually owning the protection of their poorest citizens. And we get to partner and build up local NGOs and partners within these countries as well. This comes about through training. It might be training them in information gathering, in investigations, in rescue operations. There have been entire rescue operations in the past year that IJM has not been directly involved in. But they are partners that we've trained, we've brought along, and they've now taken this methodology and this model that we have, we've handed to them freely, and they are running with it. On that map that I showed you earlier, what's not there is the places that IJM is no longer working. Places like Rwanda, places like in Cambodia where we were working with the commercial sexual exploitation of children, and now the police have owned that issue entirely. There's entire countries that IJM has been able to pull most of our offices out with the exception of maintaining and observing some of the continued gains, and that's the desire. And the reason is because IJM has an audacious goal that by 2030, we want to see 500 million children, women, and men protected from violence. I can't overstate how important this is. People deserve to live in communities where they can count on the protection of the law and strong justice systems, where women like Tayama are never enslaved in the first place. We don't have to go and rescue and restore because they were never enslaved in the first place. But in order to be able to scale up to protecting 500 million people, we have to do it through partnerships. We have to build bridges. Again, Attorney Law, he and I were chatting, and he said, the Philippines is an archipelago of 7,000 islands. You can't get anything done without partnerships. And so it's essential that we work with communities to build up internal champions within their communities, their justice systems, their NGOs, to be able to carry this work forward. Now, IJM doesn't stop at rescuing individuals who've been abused. Because the goal, again, as I said, is to prevent violence from the first place, to stop it at its source. And preventing violence really requires addressing the direct cause of violence, which is people who commit violence. We've seen over and over again across countries over 20 years of casework that when criminals are afraid of being caught, when they face real consequences under the law, when perpetrators go to jail that has an actual lengthy measurable time frame, when law enforcement won't tolerate violence and doesn't look the other way, and when the justice systems are consistently standing up for the good of the poorest and the survivors in their communities, criminals choose to stop. They won't risk committing violence because it's not worth it. This leads to deterrence. This deterrent effect leads to violence dramatically decreasing. Vulnerable people are protected in places where violence was once common. And this is why when IJM, along with our partners and our justice system officials, pursue sustainable improvements in the justice system. So if we pull out, the whole thing doesn't implode, but they're actually able to carry this work of protecting their poorest people forward. That's how you protect 500 million people from violence. People like Tayama. Now, we're seeing this pattern of transformation on a scale globally. As I mentioned, 20 years of casework, a model that we've proven in different countries and different communities, where laws are effectively enforced and people in poverty are protected from violence. We've proved that it's possible. By God's grace, we've seen over 66,000 people rescued from violence and forms of oppression. And over 3,200 criminals convicted in local courts, ensuring that they cannot hurt others. And because the power of deterrence, those convictions means that there's a broader transformation in the entire communities as stronger justice systems protect children, women, and men right from the start. So for example, when IJM first started working in the Philippines, brothels and bars in cities like Cebu were crowded with children who were being trafficked, bought, and sold for exploitation. And the criminals were brazen and confident. They knew that they had no fear of accountability for their crimes. They weren't going to get caught. We wanted to change that. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded a 5-year project from 2006 through the end of 2010 to see if the number of children exploited in commercial sex trafficking in Cebu could actually be reduced, protecting children from ever being trafficked in the first place. Now, our goal was to see a 20% reduction in the prevalence of children being sold for sex. So, from 2006 to 2010, our team in Cebu worked alongside local authorities to rescue and restore survivors of trafficking, to hold the criminals accountable in a court of law, and in the background, through the entire context happening there, to design and implement with local authorities powerful improvements in the justice system. Again, that might have been training, might have been better data processing. So, 2010 comes along. And it was time to see if children in Cebu were safer than before. And we were shocked at what the data showed us. Beyond the expectations of many within the international development community, the results far surpassed our goal of 20%. An external evaluator, this is important because we didn't just say it ourselves, but an external evaluator found that the prevalence of children exploited in bars and brothels plummeted by 72%. Now that change represents children who were never exploited in the world of sex trafficking in the first place because perpetrators realized that this crime would not be tolerated. The risk was too high. And so we launched similar programs in 2 other cities in the Philippines, in the community of Pampanga and in Manila. We wanted to see if we could replicate these results. And in Manila, we saw a 75% reduction. And in Pampanga, we saw a stunning 86% reduction of children being exploited commercially. Strengthening justice systems had protected the children in the Philippines from sex trafficking. Not only had we surpassed our goal in Cebu, but we'd proven that community after community, sustainable change was possible. Children could be protected from ever experiencing exploitation in the first place. This transformation matters because this is how IJM and our partners will reach that audacious goal of 500 million people from ever being the victims of everyday violence. This is how you can build communities where people can feel safe and protected. And it means for women like Teama, she will never have to be enslaved in the first place. And she doesn't have to live in the fear of her child being born a slave. But I felt it'd be better for you to hear it in her own words.
What?
அம்மா கதை சொல்லுமா.
கதடி கட்டுவேனா? என்ன கதை சொல்லணும் உனக்கு? இப்போ நம்ம என்ன கதை சொல்ல போறோம்னா, நீ நான் அப்பா நம்ம ஒரு இடத்துல இருந்தோம். அந்த இடத்துல இருக்கிற மாதிரி ஒரு சின்னதாக ஒரு கதை சொல்கிறோம், சரியா? நம்ம முள்ளு வெட்டுற இடத்துல போயிட்டு நம்ம வீட்டுக்கு வர முடியாத நிலைமையில இருந்தோம்.
ஏமா காட்டில் வேலை செஞ்சோம்.
அங்கே ஏமா நம்ம வேலைக்கு போனோம்னா, நீ ரொம்ப உடம்பு சரியில்லை இருந்தடி பட்டு, நீ ரொம்ப உடம்பு சரியில்லாத போது அவர்கிட்ட நம்ம கை நீட்டு நான் காசு வாங்கணும். காசு வாங்கிட்டதுனால அந்த அவர்கிட்ட நம்ம வேலைக்கு போகிற நிலைமை ஆயிடுச்சு.
என்னை வச்சுட்டு என்ன பண்ண?
அந்த லாலா மரத்தில் கட்டிட்டு உன்னை அதில் உட்கார வச்சுட்டு போவேன். நீ பார்க்கும் போதெல்லாம் எனக்கு ரொம்ப கஷ்டமாக இருக்கும். என் குழந்தை இந்த மாதிரிலாம் பார்க்குறியே, இவ்வளோ கஷ்டப்பட்டு என் பிள்ளை என் எதிரில் அழிய வச்சுனேன். என்னால் நான் ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டுருக்கேன். அவங்க ஆனால் பயங்கரமான ஆள் அந்த ஓனர், தெரியுமா? ரொம்ப கோவக்காரன்.
இது யார் மதி?
அந்த ஆளாமா நம்ம வேலை செய்கிற ஓனர் தான். இங்கே மரத்தாண்டியே தான் நம்மளை அங்கேயே தான் வச்சுருப்பான். அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு பயங்கரமான ஆள். அவன்லாம் அடிச்சுக்கிறான், தெரியுமா? ரொம்ப மிருகமா அவன். ரொம்ப டார்ச்சல்மா அவன்.
நல்லா வாசனை வருதா?
ஆமாண்டா சொல்லுவான். இது ரொம்ப வாசனையாகவே வரும் நம்மளுக்கு இந்த குழம்பு வச்சுனாவே.
நம்ம சாம்பார் சாப்பிட்டோமா?
நம்மக்கிட்ட என்ன இருக்குதுன்னா இந்த புளிப்பு கஞ்சி தவிர வேறு எதுவும் இருக்காது. நீ கேட்ட மாதிரி பருப்பு சாம்பார் சாப்பிட்ணும் நம்மளுக்கும் ஆசை தானே. நம்ம சாப்பிட்ணுன்னா புளிப்பு கஞ்சி தவிர வேறு எதுவும் இல்லைம்மா. கேட்பியா லாவண்யா? இவ்வளோதான் நம்ம அந்த இடத்துல அந்தளவுக்கு கஷ்டப்பட்டுருக்கோம் அந்த மிருகத்துக்கிட்ட.
சரி சரி கதை சொல்லு.
அதுக்கப்புறம் உடம்பு ரொம்ப டயர்டாகிடும். எனக்கு தலைவலி அதிகமாகிடும், சாப்பிடவே தோணாது, வாமிட் எடுத்துகிட்டு இருப்பேன். அதுக்கப்புறம் தான் எனக்கு தெரிஞ்சுக்கிட்டேன் எனக்குள்ளே ஒரு பாப்பா இருக்குது. தம்பி பாப்பாவா இல்லை தங்கச்சி பாப்பாவா தெரியும்.
நம்ம அங்கேருந்து ஓடிப்பல
நம்ம எல்லாரும் நான் என்னையும் அடிக்கும், அப்பாவையும் அடிக்கும். நம்ம பாப்பா வயிற்றுல வச்சுக்கிட்டு கூட நினச்சே பார்க்க மாட்டாமா அந்த மிருகம். அந்த மிருகம் அந்த மாதிரி செய்யும் போதெல்லாம் நம்ம எப்படி போக முடியுமா?
மயக்கமா இருக்குன்ற என்ன மயக்கமா இருக்கு?
அப்படி நான் அத்தை யோசிச்சு நான் என்ன பண்ணுறதுனே தெரியல. விடவே இல்லை நினச்சுமா நான். அங்காள பரமேஸ்வரி என் தாயே நீ வந்தாலும் வரவேணுமே. அங்காள பரமேஸ்வரி என் தாயே நீ வந்தாலும் வரவேணுமே.
அந்த மிருகத்தை நம்ம எப்படி தப்பிச்சோம்?
நம்மள மாதிரி நல்ல மனுஷனுங்க இருக்கிறாங்க. அவங்கக்கிட்ட அவங்க வந்தாங்க. அவங்கக்கிட்ட நம்ம குறைய நம்ம கஷ்டத்தை அவங்கக்கிட்ட நான் சொன்னேன். லாவண்யா, நம்ம கஷ்டத்துக்காக நான் குரல் கொடுத்தேன். கஷ்டம் நான் வெளியே சொல்லவே தான் எங்களை மீட்டு எடுத்து வெளியே விட்டுருக்காங்க.
பாப்பா என்னாச்சு?
நம்ம பாப்பாவா? பப்ளு எங்கதான் வச்சுப்பா.
Born free, never a slave. Because his brave mother chose to fight for his freedom and for hers. Because supporters around the world, including here in Canada, who sent IJM to show up right on time, to make her impossible dream for her child a reality. And this is the dream that I hope we can share together, a world where the oppressed are not just made free, but that every person is born free and can stay free. And it's a dream we can make possible. It's a dream that you and I can make possible. As Te Ama, with her baby boy. And that woman in the middle is my boss, IJM Canada CEO Anu George Kanjanatopoulos, she's an incredible woman. She was responsible for rescuing over 10,000 people in India in the teams that she was leading. And she was part of the team who rescued Tayama in that footage that you saw, that live rescue footage in that video. And after 9 years of working in India, she came to Canada in part because she knows the importance of a Sunday like today. She sat with her staff in her office in Chennai, knowing that they had 2 rescue operations ready to go, but that they only had the resources to go to one. That they had to choose who they were going to rescue because the funding just wasn't there. Freedom Partners are the faithful, compassionate, dedicated IJM monthly donors who make rescues like Tayama's possible. That dependable funding that monthly giving provides means that when a rescue operation is ready to go, that it's greenlit, that there's no question about whether there's enough resources. You and I are too often the difference of someone being born free or not at all. And I would love for this to be the beginning of our relationship, standing together for women like Tayama, standing together to make an end to slavery. As a Freedom Partner, you would be joining a passionate community of people who believe that real change is possible and who know that justice is not just a Freedom Sunday one moment. It's not a single action, but it is a long, hard, but beautiful battle. And by becoming a Freedom Partner, you're investing in transformation. Transformation in the life of a woman like Tayama and a family, transformation in a broken justice system, but also transformation and redemption of this broken world. The great requirement that Tony talked about. Now, a lot of people, when they choose to give, one amount that stands out is $35 a month. And the reason why I say that is because our teams have looked at real numbers around the world and provided real aftercare for someone like Tayama immediately after a rescue. Things like mandatory medical screening, medical care, food assistance. And then for people who live in India, the opportunity to be able to get a released bonded labor certificate. Many of our casework files show our rescued survivors holding a laminated certificate. And this certificate entitles them in India to reparation payments, to food vouchers, sometimes even to housing allocations because of their time in slavery. But if they don't have this certificate, they don't get it. So it's laminated. It's one of the most precious things that they have. That $35 a month provides for those immediate aftercare needs that we need to provide. You may even feel led to give more. But I want you to know that any amount that you choose to give will make a difference for people who are waiting for rescue and hope. So I'm going to ask right now, would you consider signing up to become a Freedom Partner today? The work of justice is not just a one-faceted thing. And for us as followers of Jesus to live in this beautiful meshing of the gospel, the great commandment, the great commission, and the great requirement means we're going to see justice lived out in other areas of our life. This is one of them. But for you today, this can be one part of this journey, of the hard work of thinking through how to do justice in every area of your life. There's a beautiful prayer that I actually had shared with me recently from one of my colleagues in Latin America, a man I'd never heard of before, a man named Saint Oscar Romero. He was an archbishop in El Salvador who spoke out against the oppression of the poor by the right-wing government, who were very militaristic in El Salvador at the time. And he was actually martyred. He was executed on a Sunday when he was presiding over mass, and delivering the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist. And this prayer has been sort of attributed to him, and it's less of a prayer and really more of an exhortation and encouragement. And it says, "It helps every now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete." Which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement, like mine, can say all of what needs to be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit, no matter how good it is, Tony, brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. And no set of goals or objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that, because it enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and to do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between master builder and the worker. We are the workers, not the master builder. We are ministers, not messiahs. And we are prophets of a future not our own. I'm grateful for the hundreds and thousands more who will be set free because of what we do here this weekend. And by God's grace, hopefully many weekends to come. And Freedom Sunday is just one expression of what it means to stand up as a church for those who are oppressed around the world. We have resources for praying together as a church. We have resources for Bible studies together as a church. I don't want this to just be a one-off. Robyn showed up that one Sunday. Remember that? He had a tiny shirt. I don't know what that was about. This can be the beginning of a long, beautiful battle for justice. Let's go back to Luke 4:16-20. I looked like there was a slide, but there wasn't a slide. You're good. You're done. Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of the sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, and he gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down, and the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he said to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. I'm going to be at the back. There's a table with a big blue IJM banner. I'm going to have these cards here. And they're a way for you to sign up if you want to become a Freedom Partner today. I wanted to give a resource as well for you, Tony, and your church. I have a copy here of Gary Haugen's book, The Good News About Injustice. I'm going to give to you, and you can feel free to share it. And you guys know he has it, so you can ask him for it. And this is a church curriculum called God of Justice. It's sessions for individual study or group study. And I also have other copies of this at the back as well. And so if you do decide and you want to sign up as a Freedom Partner today, I want to give you as a gift your own copy of The Good News About Injustice as well. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'll be here later, still. Yeah, good, great.